welcome to the Kink Perspective. My name's Chris. I'm a psychotherapist and consultant. I want to take a quick moment to thank all of my new listeners as well as those of you who've been here from the start. Your support really does mean everything to me, and if you are enjoying the show, please don't forget to like, subscribe on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. Leaving a 5-star review really helps more people to find the show. And for those of you who want to support my work even further, there is a donation link in the description of my show. Your contributions help keep the show running, and they allow me to create new content that explores the intersection of psychology and BDSM. Now, let's get to today's topic. Today, I want to talk about something that's often overlooked in both our life and the lifestyle: emotional processing and capacity. These are concepts that we often don't think about directly, but they affect everything from our personal relationships to our power dynamics in the lifestyle. Now, at its core, emotional processing refers how we deal with our feelings, whether it's stress, sadness, fear, or any other number of emotions that we carry around with us. Processing these emotions before we ask for help or engage in deeper dynamics is essential because it allows us to come into those relationships or even those scenes more grounded and self-aware. But here's where capacity comes into play. Capacity is the amount of emotional, mental, or even physical energy we have available to handle what's in front of us. If we haven't processed how we're feeling, our capacity to engage in healthy or consensual power exchange is quite limited. This is why it's so important to understand where you are emotionally before entering a scene, negotiating your boundaries, or even having deeper conversations with your partner. In the lifestyle, capacity is essentially important because, the heightened trust and vulnerability that are involved in the activities that we do. Now, whether you're a dominant or submissive, it doesn't really matter. If you aren't aware of your emotional state or your capacity, it can impact the dynamic in ways you're not really anticipating. So today, I want to explore with all of you how emotional processing and understanding capacity can lead to healthier, more intentional power exchanges and stronger communication within the lifestyle itself. So I want to expand a little bit here on capacity and even something we call emotional readiness. So let's really talk a little bit more about what capacity means. Now, when I say capacity, I'm referring to the amount of emotional and mental space we have available at any given time to handle what's really in front of us. Now, this could be something really simple, a tough day at work, or maybe something more complex like a high-energy BDSM scene, planning trips. All of these things require a certain amount of capacity. Now, we don't often realize how much our capacity shifts depending on what we've processed emotionally, or maybe more importantly, what we haven't processed. Now, let me give you a psychological angle on this. Our brain is constantly working to process our emotions and our experiences, whether we're aware of it or not. When we don't take the time to actively process difficult emotions like grief, anxiety, stress, our brains hold on to these unresolved feelings, which can reduce the emotional bandwidth we have available for a new experience. Psychologically, this is known as emotional load. Now, if your emotional load is high, your capacity to deal with anything new, whether it's a stressful conversation with a partner or maybe engaging in some sort of scene, this becomes limited. Now, maybe think of this like a computer running multiple programs. If you got too many tabs open on your screen, everything slows down, right? And your computer gets a little laggy. That's exactly what happens with our emotional and mental capacity. If you're already carrying emotional strain, say, an unresolved conflict, maybe you're grieving something or just everyday stress, then you're operating with fewer resources available to process any new emotions or handle anything that's quite intense. This is why unprocessed feelings can lead to burnout, fatigue, or even poor decision making, both in daily life and within the lifestyle. Now, let's tie this into the power dynamics for a second. For a dominant, your role often involves being in control, guiding the experience, building the scene, watching out for the well-being of your submissive. But if your mental capacity is already strained from other issues, maybe work stress or personal matters, You might find that your patience is shorter, you're less persistent, or your ability to maintain control falters a little bit. That can create an imbalance in the scene or even undermine that trust you built with your submissive. In psychology, we sometimes call this cognitive overload, where your mind is so full that it starts to kind of miss those key details or loses some focus. Now let's flip and look at the other side, the submissive side. If you haven't processed your emotions like insecurity, anxiety, or something outside of the dynamic, you might be struggling to fully immerse yourself in the scene. You might find it harder to surrender your control or your trust because part of you is still holding on to those unprocessed feelings. In a way, it's kind of like you're emotionally checked out, even when you want to be fully present. Now, this can lead to what's sometimes referred to as emotional dissonance, the feeling where there's this disconnect between what you're experiencing and what you should be feeling in the moment. And this isn't just limited to a high intensity scene. Even the day-to-day power exchanges of the dominant submissive relationship, emotional readiness plays a huge role here. I want you to think about this emotional energy required to navigate like polyamory or managing the balance of in care and control of a long-term power exchange. If you and your partner aren't in the right emotional space, it can strain the dynamic, which leads to misunderstandings, burnout, or even resentment. This is where capacity really becomes key. It's about making sure that you've had enough emotional resources available to engage in these dynamics fully and safely. So, how do we check our capacity? First, this starts with self-awareness in your emotional check-ins. Maybe leading up to a scene a week before, or the day of the scene. It could even be about an intense conversation. You can ask yourself, do I have the emotional space for this right now? If the answer is no, that's fine. It's not a big deal because it's better to pause and come back later to it than risk pushing yourself beyond your own emotional limits. Understanding your capacity isn't about being perfect or always ready. It's really about recognizing where you are mentally and emotionally and making sure that you have the bandwidth to engage in healthy, safe ways that aren't going to strain you even further. This, in turn, leads us to this next part, self-reflection and even understanding our capacity. Now, self-reflection is something that many of us overlook, especially in the whole fast-paced lives that we lead or even in the lifestyle where intensity can sometimes take precedence over introspection. But when we talk about our emotional capacity, self-reflection here becomes the first and most important step. This becomes before we engage in a scene or a dynamic or even any serious conversation. We need to know where we stand emotionally, and that's where self-reflection comes in. Self-reflection is essentially checking in with ourselves, taking a moment to ask, how am I doing emotionally right now? What's my headspace like? Am I feeling stressed? Am I anxious? Am I upset about something? Is that even related to the dynamic or is it about the dynamic? Now, these might seem like basic questions, but they can really reveal so much about whether you're ready to engage fully or if you need to take a step back and process what's going on inside. Now, for example, before we start entering a scene, you might want to ask yourself, do I have the emotional capacity to handle the high intensity of an impact scene or a suspension scene right now? Am I carrying any stress, anything unresolved that might distract me from being fully present with my partner? Now, this is truly important because when we bring unprocessed emotions into a scene, that can disrupt the flow, the connection, or even create some sort of safety concerns. The last thing we want to do is lose focus in the moment that requires trust and clear communication. Another great self-reflective question here is, what do I need from this scene or the dynamic right now? By understanding our own needs, you can better communicate them to your partner and set clearer boundaries. Maybe you're in a space right now where you need more nurturing or a softer approach. Maybe you're feeling strong and you want to explore something more intense. Now, no matter what it is, self-reflection helps you gauge where you are emotionally. so you can engage in a way that feels aligned with your current capacity. When we skip this step, we risk not showing up fully. This can lead to miscommunications, unmet expectations, or even emotional burnout. Now, on the flip side, when we take time to reflect here, we're able to enter a scene or a conversation with more awareness. That allows a deeper connection for us. This applies to both dominants and submissives. Self-reflection here isn't just about understanding how much control or surrender we can handle, but it is about being honest with yourself and your emotional state and communicating that with your partner. And especially you doms out there, sometimes I know you've had a long day at work or you've had a rough day. Maybe things didn't go right. You got a speeding ticket. Anything that can distract you. If you're not in the headspace to be dominating someone, take a moment. Step back. It doesn't make you any less dominant to maybe stop a scene or say you don't want to proceed because you're not there. We don't just have to go forward just because our partner wants it. We too have to be in the space ready to be in charge, because if we are distracted in any way, we are not leading with trust and openness. So I really want you to think about this, that the next time you're kind of preparing for a scene or you're just trying to figure out what's going on in your relationship, take a few moments of self-reflection. Ask yourself these important questions. Not only is this going to help you gauge where you're at emotionally, but it's going to help you show up more fully, more authentically, and even with a clearer sense of what you need. And right now, I can think of some people I'm working with where they're in a dynamic and their submissive right now is struggling a little bit with something in an external factor. I think if I recall correctly, it's something going on with their educational pursuits and they're having a tough time. I think it's their study period. So it's really quite distracting. For them right now, they're not, that submissive is not in the headspace to be doing scenes. And I know a lot of people are going to say, oh, maybe, this is the right time. It'll help them focus. But, if they're going to be concentrated on their educational pursuits, and I don't want to segue too much out of this, but, I have a few things that supersede a dynamic. Our health, our family, our work, and our education. Sometimes I have another one if you have children. There are people out there that are single and have children. Those things come before a dynamic, at least for me. How you do that is on your own, but in this scenario here that I'm discussing, it's a submissive who's struggling and is really, focused on work and is taking away from the dynamic. Support your partner through it. That's my advice. Let them in the space to get through what they're getting through. Because if you try to put them in the scene, they're not going to be able to process. They're not going to be thinking clearly. And that's going to cause distractions along the way. And this is really where this whole point of capacity and consent come in. And this is really a critical aspect of all of our interactions here within the lifestyle. Consent. Everything we do revolves around it, right? It's not just about a one-time agreement. It's an ongoing conversation that requires awareness, trust, and clarity about our emotional capacity. And this whole concept of capacity directly influences consent because our ability to give informed, enthusiastic consent hinges on our emotional readiness. And I want you to think about that for a second. If you're emotionally drained, if you're stressed, or you're dealing with something that's unresolved right now in your life, your capacity to engage in a scene or a dynamic shifts significantly. This doesn't mean you're not capable of consent altogether, but rather that the quality of the consent may be compromised. And I know there's a lot of people and a lot of discussions around consent, but I'm talking about things when we ourselves are distracted. And you might find yourself agreeing to the things that you're not truly comfortable with simply because you want to please your partner or because you're not fully aware of your own needs in that moment. This is where the fluidity of consent comes into play. Consent should be an ongoing dialogue, and it's crucial that both partners regularly check in with each other, especially in intense scenes. You can ask stuff like how you're feeling right now. Is this still working for you? You can create that whole space where you can express any changes in the emotional state or capacity. This ongoing conversation helps ensure that both of you are still on the same page and the consent remains informed and enthusiastic, right? The only thing I want to add in here is we don't do consent in the moment. So we're not changing what we do. Whatever your scene is that you've agreed to, that you've set yourself up for, that the capacity is, doesn't matter if either person wants to change it. You don't do consent in the moment and don't coerce anybody. But we're not going to, I don't want to deviate from what I'm talking about here. I'm just kind of throwing those caveats out there. Now, it's really important here to recognize that our emotional states can shift, and that can be for any various reason. Stress from work, our personal lives, our physical exhaustion. Maybe you're feeling a little bit under the weather. If you enter a scene feeling strong and ready, but then you find yourself feeling overwhelmed midway through, that changes your emotional state and it can affect your capacity to continue that scene. You have to be able to articulate this shift because it's vital. It's vital for you to communicate to your dominant if something's going on so the dominant can make a decision whether the scene needs to continue and discuss it with you. You have to use that ability to say, I need a break or let's slow down. This is essential for maintaining the integrity of the experience and ensuring that everyone involved feels safe and respected. I have some submissives that I work with where they'll say, I don't want to share certain things with my dom because I don't want to feel like I'm letting them down. You're not letting them down. I promise you, a dominant's job is to look out for our submissive. I've recently experienced this where I had to encourage somebody to talk to their dominant about some things that were going on. They had built up this conversation in their head. That conversation didn't go the way they, terribly imagined it. It went quite the opposite. Their dominant was happy and respectful. Their dominant encouraged them, was looking out, making sure that they're safe. All of these things, all of these fears that they had were absolutely abated because their dominant was caring. And they didn't have to worry that they weren't being listened to. But sometimes that fear inside of us about these things, letting somebody down, stops us from these conversations. All of these things here, all of this communication about our capacity isn't just beneficial, it's necessary. It can mean the difference between a fulfilling experience or one that leads to whole regret and emotional distress. And if your capacity is changed during the scene, here's the big one. It's your responsibility to communicate that. Let me repeat that. It's your responsibility to communicate if your capacity is changed during a scene or your relationship or anything else. It's equally important for your partner to create that space where you want to communicate and you feel safe and supported and heard. But this whole mutual understanding not only, it just doesn't create trust, but it strengthens that whole bond between the two of you. And it allows you to engage in activities with greater confidence and clarity. So as we go through all of this, you have to remember it's the vital role that capacity plays in our consent, our relationships. It's about making sure that both of us have our voice and that we can communicate things, our boundaries, and how we're feeling, that all of us feel empowered and safe, but we're on the same page. Which, I'm telling you all this and, some of you are going to be saying, but Chris, how do I do this? Well, that's a really good question. So I've got some tips for you all here. How do we assess and communicate our capacity? And if we dive into some of these tips, these can really help you check in on your emotional capacity and communicate those things with your partner, or maybe just your scene partner. These aren't rigid rules, by the way. Think of them as maybe some suggestions that make those conversations feel a little bit more natural and a lot easier. First, regular check-ins. Now, I'm a big believer in checking in, right? First off, you've got to make check-ins totally part of your routine. If you don't, I think you're also missing out on a really key element in the lifestyle, especially once you're in an established dynamic. It doesn't have to feel like a formal sit down, but it can just simply be something like, hey, how are you feeling today? What's on your mind? Just keeping a conversation flowing can really help the both of you gauge where you're at emotionally. Second, remember to use I statements. Now, this is something I talk about in therapy all the time. When we're talking about things, when we're talking about ourselves, we don't want to make our partner feel like they're being attacked or they need to be on the defense. So when you're sharing how you feel, really use these types of statements. Instead of saying, you always want to do this, you might want to really say, I feel a bit overwhelmed right now and I kind of need to take it a little bit slow, or maybe I just need to talk a little bit. This way it's all about your experience, which can make your partner feel a little less defensive and definitely more open to understanding. Now, we're all very well aware of having an established safe word or even a signal, but even consider maybe having a check-in word. This can be, like a little bit of a pause to see where you're both feeling. It's a gauge, and it takes a little bit of the pressure off. I'm not talking about stopping the scene completely, especially if it's something rather intense, but it's, even what if it's getting too intense and we don't know how to communicate that because both of us are floating, one's in top space, the other's in subspace. We need to check in because, great, we're floating, but my God, I'm not handling this very well. I'm floating too hard, too fast. I don't know how to gauge it, right? All of these things. Another thing here is, again, we're back to some sort of, stuff that I talk about when I'm working with couples or working with people in general. Practice active listening. When your partner shares their thoughts or their feelings with you, tune in, lean in. Practice active listening by giving them your full attention. Stop what you're doing, put the cell phone down, stop playing your games, put your book down, and show them that you're engaged in what they're saying. A simple nod, or maybe even saying to them, you know what, I hear you. That goes a long way to making them feel validated and understood. Finally, create a really supportive environment. Set the stage for these conversations. Find a comfortable, distraction-free space where you can both feel safe to express yourselves. Now, maybe it's your couch, a quiet corner of your favorite cafe, or somewhere that the right atmosphere can really help ease the conversation. The goal here is to create a space where open dialogue for the both of you so you can feel comfortable to share. And then when you create this space, it's not only enhances your ability to talk about emotional capacity, but also strengthens the trust between the two of you. This kind of connection makes your experiences even richer and more fulfilling. But finally, I kind of want to start wrapping things up here, and I want to talk about how recognizing the emotional capacity really does enhance your power exchange in our dynamics. This is something that benefits all of us that are involved. Now, first off, when both partners are aware of each other's emotional capacity, it creates a foundation of deeper trust. Trust is obviously the real bedrock of any relationship, vanilla or otherwise, especially more so for those of us in a lifestyle. Now, when you know your partner is attuned to how you're feeling, it really does allow both of you to explore those dynamics freely. You dive into those intense scenes with more confidence, knowing that your partner is watching out for you. Also, understanding capacity leads to safer play. When both of you communicate your limits and you're checking in with each other, it reduces the risks of any types of misunderstandings or pushing boundaries too far. It's all about creating a safe spot where both of you are exploring those desires and fantasies, feeling secure and respected. And let's not forget about the whole impact on the connection. Recognizing capacity here allows for a more meaningful interaction between the two of you. It's not just about the physical aspects of BDSM. It's about that emotional intimacy too. And when you engage in these check-ins and share your emotional states, you build that deeper, richer bond with your partner. And let me tell you, there's nothing better when you're connected in a scene, you're maybe doing something heavy, and all of a sudden that intimacy part kicks in. This leads to a much more fulfilling experience in and out of the scene. Now, in short, with all of this, both sides of the slash have to prioritize this understanding and the whole communicating capacity. If you do this, every person wins. You bolster trust, you reduce your risk, you make a deeper connection, and your overall experience in the lifestyle is genuinely better. Consider making this a priority in your practice. You should. So I'm not going to say because not everybody's going to do this, and that's okay, but it truly is going to transform the way we connect with each other. Now, I want to leave you with this little bit of final thought here. Emotional check-ins aren't just nice to have. They are an essential part of building strong, trusting relationships in the lifestyle. I really do encourage you to practice those check-ins and communicate openly with your partners, especially when it comes to your capacity, especially when it comes to your emotional processing. It's not just about what happens in the scene, it's about that a whole emotional connection that sustains those experiences for years to come. By making that space for these conversations, you do deepen your relationships. You really do create a safer, riskier, or less risky environment for both of you and your partner to explore your desires and fantasies together. And if we look and explore and go through our power exchange, take a moment to really check in with yourself, check in with your partner. It's going to strengthen your bond and make your dynamic even more vibrant. And I want to kind of get some feedback from you all. I'd love to hear how you do this in your relationship. Let me know in the comments section below. I'll make a post to social media. Let me know. Because I think this is something that's going to actually help others and strengthen their relationships, especially if they're feeling a little bit alone or kind of unsure how to navigate all of this territory. Now, if you are curious, yes, I do have a book out. It's been out for a while. It's now in print or wherever you can download your books. It's called Tangled Desires, the intersection between BDSM and psychology. I want to kind of plug as well, if you are looking for a therapist in the lifestyle, or you have any other sort of issues you might be contending with, please feel free to reach out. The link to my therapy practice will be in the description for the show, so if you need to, please, you can send me a private, confidential email. We can talk and go from there. But let me know what you thought about the show today, what thoughts you have going on about capacity, and maybe how you gauge those in your own relationship. Until next time, everybody, be safe and stay kinky.